Well, welcome to this special edition of Restoring Home, where Steve and Laura Ross and Don and I are going to share more stories of encounters with God and of our experiences from the mission field that have been inspirational. And I'm going to actually begin with one that's a little bit entertaining. We have lots of those, don't we? And in fact, Steve's been keeping us pretty much entertained here for the last bit with his stories. Some of them that we can tell and some of them that we won't tell that Steve's been bringing up. But it is fun to sit around and tell stories because they are entertaining sometimes, and usually because of our faux pas or because of cultural differences from the mission field. And but also they're all often very inspiring and deeply meaningful to us, as you had shared earlier, Laura, in some of your stories from a while ago. But it's good to have our kids around to listen. It's good for us to sit around and listen to them as well. But to have our kids to sit around and listen to these true stories from people that are contemporary, that are here with us now. And so we're going to share a few. Just we have a half hour or so that we'll just kind of casually be telling the stories to one another. I'll start it off really quickly with a funny story. This isn't meant to inspire, but it is. It's also good for the kids to hear the funny stuff and to know that it's real and there's real things to it. So food, you told a few stories just in the break time about some food items, and I won't ask you to go back into those. But I remember my first encounter when I was in East Africa, and I was sitting in the first village experience with some missionaries, and we're outside, mud walled grassrooted houses around, and very much in Africa, languages that I didn't understand. I was a junior in college, and my first time to leave the States, and so everything was pretty wow for me. And a classmate of mine, and then we were with a missionary family. So we were sitting around, and it was lunchtime. We had a Sunday gathering when we were there. We all got together, and then there was lunch. So we were outside at lunch, and this kind African Kenyan woman came by and had a pretty large cup, the metal cup that she brought, and put in front of me, just on the ground there in front of me, in the grass in front of me. And then another lady came by. Everybody was getting cups. Another lady came by with a large gourd. It was about this big, and just a dried gourd, and it had a top on it that was made of leather or something. Yeah. And so she brought this gourd, and it had beads on it. So she brought this gourd and she started shaking it with the top on it, shaking it to stir it up or whatever to get it ready. And then what she poured for me was sort of bluish, grayish looking, creamy something with sort of like chunks in it. It's kind of like, it's coming out, it's got a gluk every now and then, kind of a gluk thing. And it was milk. But this particular tribe will take a certain plant that they burn, and it makes a char or a soot, and then they put that inside of their gourd, so they soot the whole inside of it. Then they pour it with fresh milk and then cap it and put it aside for a few days or weeks, unrefrigerated, so that it clabbers. And then they bring that out and sort of break up all the curds and the chunks that are formed inside and pour it up for guests. It's called mrasik. And so I didn't even know how to drink buttermilk at home in the States. So that was really a challenge to consider at that point. So, but I'm wanting to be a good guest and show respect and gratitude and such. So I took the first swallow, and it didn't go. It came kind of back, and so I tried harder, and it went back again. I'm literally sweating at this point. I
thought these were the stories we wouldn't tell.
These are the funny ones.
Discourage anyone.
These are the funny ones. We'll get to the inspiring ones, but everybody knows that these happen, and we love to hear them as well when we're telling stories. So the third time I got it down, and somehow through the next half an hour, I guess, everybody's talking, having a great time, just slugging this stuff left and right, and I finally get my pretty enormous cup full of this down. And I'm feeling pretty victorious and like relieved as well. So I put my cup down, and I kid you not, I no sooner turned to talk to the person beside me than here the sweet lady comes again and she refills my cup. I was stuck. I thought, I can't do it. There's no way, I'll lose everything. And so it was a pickle to be in, so to speak. But I managed to try, I think, in the crowd of people and everybody around and being in fairly deep grass and on a low stool, I managed to sort of take my cup and put it down and sort of accidentally spill it. And all shucks, and picked up my cup and guarded it with my life. So when she did come around the next time, I said, you know, I didn't know the language, so I just like, no, it's okay, thank you. So I held on to my cup and managed to get through the day. 10 years later, after we'd lived there for 10 years, I will tell you today, if I went there today, I would ask for that. I love it. I grew to appreciate it. I really do. I love it. It's the best stuff in the world if you get it. If it's under 3 weeks old.
Eat it with
a little
some
older than that, it's kind of
ugali,
stiff.
the cornmeal mush. He would love it.
Oh, I love it. It's a great snack with the ugali. So anyway, you adjust. But we all start off that way. And people's kindnesses, cultural kindnesses and goodnesses and those kind of things are just, we have to learn to appreciate that. That's part of it. But let's hear some other stories from you guys. Maybe Laura, you maybe have prepared something for something that's just a memorable.
I do. There was a community, and when I say community, it was a community of 3 homes, and these 3 families lived what we would say off the grid. It was literally in the jungle. We would take our truck and drive and get as far as we could, and then you had to hike in, and there wasn't even a path. I felt like a mountain goat sometimes just trying to get in there, but I loved going there. It was a very interesting community. In this community was a man named Oscar, and he was an older gentleman, and he was raising several young grandchildren. The parents had left to try to find work, to try to send money back, and so he was raising them in this setting, no school, nothing. So it was just a very interesting cultural experience even just to go there. And one day I was sitting there with him, and he had this little bench outside of his home, and we were sitting there, and I looked up, and there was an overhang in this area, and there was the face, just the face of an old fan. So they had taken the face off of this fan, hooked some strings to it, and made a hanging basket out of it. And in this hanging basket was a Bible. And so I said, "Oh, I see you have a Bible. That's great." And he stood up, he took the Bible down, and he handled it so carefully, like it was just the most fragile thing. And he sat it on his lap, and he opened it, and he said, "I've never been able to read it, and no one here can read. But I know this is God's word, and so he teaches me from it." And I said, "Well, how does he teach you from it?" And he closed it, and he literally he held it to his chest. He said, "I hold it here, and I pray, and I pray, and I ask God, please, I can't read these words. Put these words in my heart. Put them in my mind."
Wow.
And he does. And I've learned so many things about who God is and how he wants me to be from his word. And I thought, what a powerful testimony of how God's Spirit works. That it's not limited to ink on a piece of paper, but you know, Scripture tells us that the Spirit teaches. And we always want to limit that, you know. And to see that just this man's intense love for what that Bible was, if this is God's word, and that he wanted to respect it, and God honored that love and used his Spirit to teach this man in a way that I can't understand. But I knew from the way he lived and the way he talked, he knew who God was. And it was just an amazing experience.
Wow.
Yeah.
We had an old fellow, you remember Bunda Teach? He used to be he was a former, they call him
Witch doctor.
Orgoyot.
Yeah.
It wasn't really, it was like a shaman.
Yeah.
A medium between the spirit world and the living. And so, but he became a Christian, and he was a great storyteller. Phenomenal
Funny,
storyteller.
too.
Hilarious, funny. But the people really loved his storytelling abilities, and when he became a Christian, they listened to him as well. But he had a little cassette player about this big, had a winding handle on it, and it didn't use batteries, it just used winding to play cassette tapes of Scripture. And he
In his language.
In his language, yeah. So he could understand it. So he couldn't read, but he knew how to turn that. So he would listen to Scripture all the time. So he'd go around villages where these old guys were, that were his generation group, his age group, that didn't know how to read either, and who had followed him into some, unsavory things in his past. And he would go sit with his old buddies and get that thing out, and he'd pull it out, and he'd say, "Gus, Gus," which means listen to this. And he'd play it. He'd make them listen to Scripture, and they'd all lean in. And he taught so many old guys just by playing Scripture like that, God's Word.
How neat is that?
Yeah.
I
He was a
love
great
that.
fella.
Love it.
Yeah. Some other
Are you
stories
tell
you got,
a
Steve?
story, or at least start a story?
Well, as you're aware, when you go to a different culture, things you might do here are not acceptable
Yeah.
the way you do it down there or in some other place.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way you wave or do certain gestures, like come
to be
here and
careful.
things like that, can be misinterpreted. So one night we're all together and we were having a little party and a celebration.
In Honduras.
Yes, and Laura's out in the outer area talking to people, and I'm in this room, and there are people sitting to the right and left of me, and then there's another wall, and people are over there. One of those people was Yule's sister, I believe. It was his sister, okay. She's about 18 years old, very pretty young lady. I'm sitting there, I can't talk to anybody because I don't speak Spanish, but everybody else is just conversing, having fun. And I happen to look over and see his sister, and she blows a kiss at me. Now, I don't understand the cultural thing, but I do know that that's really not a good thing. And so I look away. I look back, and she's smiling really big now, and she does it again. And I'm in shock, and I can't figure out why this girl's blowing kisses at me. And so
We
I
can't
yell,
either, Steve.
Yeah.
We can't wait to hear this story.
Yeah, it's a great mystery to all. So I yelled, "Laura," and she goes, "What?" I said, "I need you here." And she goes, "I'm kind of busy right now." I said, "Oh, no. You come here right now."
You start to
Right
panic.
now. So she comes in. Now I look
Not
over,
right.
and Yule's sister is laughing her head off because she's figured out what I think is going on.
Yeah.
Laura walks in and says, "What is the problem?" I said, "Yule's sister is blowing kisses at me." And she looks over at Yule's sister, who is laughing and goes like this. And Laura goes, No, she is not blowing kisses at you. That is how they point.
I was going to say, that's what they do in Kenya too. They do.
Oh, well,
Point with their
they
lips.
don't do it in Ohio that way. And now, of course, Laura has to tell everybody in the room what happened. Everybody's dying laughing except me.
Why was she pointing at you though?
She
No,
really
she was
wasn't pointing
actually
at me.
trying to get him to look at something else.
Oh, like look over
Right, and the
there.
way they do it is they will look at that thing, look at you and go,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
so
that's
he
what they
did,
do in
yeah.
Kenya, too.
Yeah, and there's certain words you don't use, like macho and things like that.
Well, that depends on the setting.
Yeah,
Yes,
on the
we've learned
setting,
some- We've
but-
learned some cultural things.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
one of my experiences in learning how they do things.
do
Language
things,
and
yeah.
culture.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's
Interesting.
so much.
You have to know. You have to learn.
Yes.
Earlier, you'd mentioned about in our other taping that we did earlier, interview time, you mentioned about how God provided for you. You were both praying, whoever God provides for, that's who will go on the mission trip to Russia or to Honduras, and you get your funds. When I was a junior in college, and was invited to go for the summer to a 6-week internship in Kenya. I think it was $2,000 was what would be for all of the travel and the passport and inoculations and visas, all that stuff. I was told you need to raise $2,000. That was a pretty good bit of money, but that's what it took. And so there was a way in which I wanted to go, and there's a way in which I really didn't want to go. It's sort of like I felt obligated before God to go because I realized I could do this. Mm-hmm. And I'd been inspired at the workshop by Bob Brown and some others, and I wanted to go be involved in that great, exciting, productive world of missions. At the same time, I was really afraid I would die. I thought I'll catch something in Africa, I'll die. So, and I'd never traveled far from my home. I'd never been on an airplane before. So I was a little bit afraid. So I was kind of hoping that I wouldn't get the money in time. And I'd be able to say, oh, well, I tried, but it didn't happen, so I'm off the hook. Well, I prayed. And there was a very short window of time. I think it was like 4 weeks, 3-4 weeks that I had to, and it's a cutoff, a deadline. I had to have the money. It's $2,000. I didn't know many people, so I knew like 6 church leaders in our area at home. So I wrote letters to those 6 men that I knew and said, I'd like to go on this trip, and can you help out? And here's the cost. And I sent it off. So I got back, I don't know what it was. I think it was $600 the first group that wrote back, and I still had maybe a couple of weeks to go. So I was like, well, there's a start, but I got a long ways to go. Maybe I'll be okay. So it kept coming in until it came down to the end, and I'd gone around to some of my friends at school. We had something called a key deposit, which is at the beginning of a semester, you give $5 for the key, and then when you leave at the end of the semester, if you turn the key back in, you get your $5 back, right? So, key deposit. So I went around to some buddies of mine, and enough of them to equal $100. So I had 20 buddies that gave me their key deposit. So I was going along, and then so on the day of, when you had to have all the money, I got the last dollar. It made exactly $2,000. And so I was like, I gotta go.
Gotta go.
I gotta go. I get to go. I gotta go. Anyway, so I started buying the tickets and getting everything after that. Well, it comes to the end of the semester. That was a little before the semester ended. Mm-hmm. So about 3 weeks later, end of the semester, and I go around to get the key deposits, and all of my friends are gone. They forgot all about their key deposits, and so I'm $100 short. So I still had enough to go on the trip and all that kind of thing, but I'm thinking to myself, I wonder if this is really God or not. I don't know. It kind of messed with my God answered my prayers thing, and God's behind this thing. And so, but I decided I should go. I mean, I've already got the tickets, and it's got close enough, and it wasn't God's fault. It was their fault. Anyway, I kind of tried to figure out what was going on. And then the next, so I went home for a week or so before we take off on the trip. And while I was home, I was over visiting a friend of mine, a young lady that I was friends with, wasn't necessarily dating, but it was a friend. And I was at her home and just saying hello, and about ready to go, and her dad walks in the room. And as he walks through, he had an envelope, and he walked through and he just dropped it in my lap, and he said, "Here." He didn't, that's all he said. When you're in college and all dads are kind of like, you're afraid of them. So he walked through and he just dropped that envelope in my lap, and he said, "Here." And that's all he said, and he left. So we finished our visit and stuff, and on the way home, of course, I look in the envelope, and it was a gift in there, the note for my mission trip, and it was a $100 gift. I never got $2,001. I got exactly the $2,000 and went on the trip. And 10 years later, and we spent 10 years there in missions. So those kinds of things are all over the place.
Yes.
How God provides at the last minute, exactly, and they build our faith.
Exactly.
And telling them is faith building.
Right.
George Muller's story is full of those. It's one of those books in the library we have here.
Yeah.
So, did you have a story you want to share?
I thought of something I wanted to share that he knows the story. I'll tell it to you guys. Right before we went to Kenya, we were spending some time with other veteran missionaries and asking questions. And I remember I asked this one lady, give us advice. What would you say to us just ready to launch out, and we're scared and we don't know. There's so many unknowns. We didn't even know what tribe we were going to work with or anything. And so she said, low expectation on people and circumstances, and high expectation on God. And I was just like, okay, I gotta remember that. And I never have forgotten it my whole life, and it has served me so well. So we went, and I was thinking, well, since I don't know if I'm going to even have electricity, low expectation on my circumstances and people, because people are people. But God is God.
Right.
And so I kept trusting that he would give me whatever I needed to be able to survive or to thrive even in that circumstance. And so I remember one of the promises that God gives us is that when we leave, he will provide mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers. I'm going to start crying. And of course, over the years that we were in Kenya, we just fell in love with so many people. God did give us grandparents and mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers. So then we had to leave. And that was so hard. And I decided, and it took so much faith to come back, because I don't know why it seemed like it took more faith to return than to go. And so we had a big women's meeting. This is after we'd been there 7.5 years. And I was speaking to the women, and I decided to do it on faith, because I was trying to learn about having faith going into this next season. And I got choked up, which the Kenyan women are so stoic when they have really terrible, if someone has died, they have this little la la la, you know, they have this trilling thing that they do. But in general, you know, when they have hardships, they bear it. They're so strong, and they saw crying as kind of a weakness. Well, I got choked up. I could not cry. I had this big lump in my throat. I couldn't even keep talking. And I'm standing before like 250 women, and I'm like, oh my goodness, to them, this is not faith. It's not looking like faith at all. And so I kind of pulled myself together again and continued on. But I was saying goodbye. And when I walked out, when I looked up, thinking, pull it together, Donna, they were crying. So I finished, and they're all just like grabbing a hold of me as I'm walking out. And then I saw my grandmother, that God had given us, Ellen, and I said, oh, Ellen, forgive me, I couldn't not cry. And she said, chicha. She said, no, that was the Spirit of God. That's what that was. And I was like, oh, okay, good. I'm glad that they saw that for that.
Yeah.
It was just precious. Just God's provision.
It's amazing, isn't it?
And also just that he did give me what I needed, and that I could have a high expectation on him. So
That's awesome.
anyways.
And
he's a good
family on the
provider.
mission field
I know.
always happens,
I
and
know.
it's an amazement. It really
Yeah.
is.
But I know you guys have more stories. Tell us some more.
Well, you know, you were just talking about provision and the people that you pray for, and you prayed for family. I prayed for what I labeled a champion. We were going to go into a village area where we didn't really know anyone, where no one had worked, and we were going to start something totally new to them. And a book that I had read, that was one of the biggest suggestions they had. You have to find someone in the local community who will champion, who can see your vision, who can grab a hold of it, and who can champion it.
Kind of like the man of peace. Have you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
scripture about that.
So that was my prayer before we even got there, is that God would show me who this champion would be. And that I would be clear, you know, that's who it is. So we had only been working there about a month in the village when a foreman on a project we were working on came to me and goes, oh, we have a new man who came to work. Actually, it had only been about 2 weeks maybe. And he gave me his name. And he wrote the name down because he said, I can't pronounce his name. It's the weirdest name I've ever heard. And he handed me the piece of paper, and it said Yul Brynner. Okay, being North American and knowing who this actor was and being in this remote Honduran village to see this name, I thought it was a joke. I said, was he teasing you? He said, no, he was serious. This is his name. I said, oh, I have to meet him just because of the name, you know. And it was always my practice anyway after lunch to go meet anybody who came to volunteer and work with us from the village. And so I did go after lunch, and I asked him, well, where is this Yule Brenner guy? And he pointed to this bathroom that was on the outside of this clinic we were working on. There was this one little stall bathroom that we were taking out and redoing. And so I walked around the corner, and I will never forget this picture. He was sitting, and this was a tiny bathroom. He was sitting all crunched up in it with a hammer, knocking something off with the hammer. And I said hi to him. He spoke to me, and I asked him his name. Didn't tell him I had already heard it. I just really wanted to see if he told me the same thing. And he said, my name's Yule Brenner, but it's an awful name. And he literally, I have a picture of him that I took that day. He looks like the saddest, most miserable person. And I said to him, oh, I think that is an awesome name. Do you know who that person is? And he said, no. He said, my dad gave me this name, and I've just had to live with it. People have never pronounced it right. They make fun of it. And the way they say it, they don't say Yule, they say Jewel. And so I used that pronunciation and kind of played on that. And I said, I think it's beautiful because the word jewel in English is a precious stone. And that's what you are. You are a precious stone. And he just kind of looked at me very interested, but sort of, you know, who is this person? Well, anyways, I could go on in a lot of detail, but I won't. One of the things we did is we would invite our workers to lunch so we could kind of get to know these volunteers who were coming from the village. That was our plan, to start some relationship. He would never come. Never would come. He'd be the only one that wouldn't come. And finally, I asked some of the workers there, why doesn't he come? He's just a real shy person, you know. I said, and he would stand like really far away. You could see him because we were meeting in a classroom. He'd stand on the other side of the schoolyard just waiting for everyone to finish eating. So I said, oh, he's coming today. And they're like, no, he won't. So I just yelled out the door, hey, Jewel, you need to come and eat because I'm not going to eat and we're not going to start without you. And I walked away. I didn't give him a chance to respond. And we sat, and he did. He came. And we sat and ate, and he wouldn't look at me day after day. And I finally said, are you afraid of me? Now, this is a macho culture. And you do learn to live within the culture you're in and to use it to God's advantage. And so he looked up and goes, no, I'm not afraid to talk to you. And from that moment on, we talked. This man, just so you know where he was in life and why he looked so miserable, is because he was. He was a very heavy drinker. He snipped glue daily. He and these are his self-descriptions. He was a womanizer. He just lived a bad life, and he was miserable. And he is now a minister. He is the general manager of the mission work down there. And that came through him saying at one point to me, I've been praying to God. I don't even know how to do that. I've just been talking to him. I know I need to change my life. I don't know how. And I've been asking. I said, how long ago did you start? He goes, I don't know, probably about a month or two ago. And I've just been asking him to send someone here to show me how to change my life. And I've been watching you guys, and I love what I see. And that was the start of working with him. And so now, you know, here we are 16 years later from that village point. And to see where he's at, and he's leading this mission. He has brought so many people to faith, and including his whole family. Just an amazing story of how he's looked upon as a leader in the village now. So pretty awesome. That. But he's the champion. He's the one that God chose to be that champion, and we never would have guessed that poor lowly man all curled up in the bathroom floor looking miserable would be the champion God would choose. But that's how he works.
And we took a trip once to Sudan, a group of guys. It was a short-term trip. This was years after we moved to Kenya. In fact, we'd gone back to the States at that point, but I was invited to be a part of a group of about 22 guys. Some were Africans and some were Americans. And we went into southern Sudan, into Darfur, when there was some conflict back in those days. And most of the people had been chased out by the northern regime coming out of Khartoum, who were coming down to get the oil and minerals that were in the area, in the region. And so the tribes people who lived there were being forced out. And most of them had gone into either Chad or they'd gone into Central African Republic. And those were getting aid. They were in the news. You saw them on TV, and they were getting aid from USAID and NORAID and all these international organizations. So they got plenty of attention, but a friend of a friend that knew me and put our expedition together heard from a Ugandan who said there are people who are going south, still in Sudan, but they're going into this region that's very remote, and we believe there are refugees there, but they're not getting any attention or any aid. Can we put together some people, go in there and see what the needs are and see if we can bring them some aid? Find them if they're there, and then see what we can do. So this group of 20 or 22 guys were invited to come together to put together a 2-week trip to see if we could go in there and find these people, and if we could find them, what could be done for them. So there was one retired medical person, there was a veterinarian, a teacher, a school teacher, I knew cross-cultural stuff and some East African language stuff, and there were others who were in there who were business people, some who knew agriculture. We had all these different skills sets that were brought together, and some businessmen were there. So all these skills came together to go in and assess and come up with something to bring back and somehow to get these people some help. So, of course, we were in prayer about it, but when we arrived in Nairobi, it was in an evening, and we all came different flights, different times, but we finally were all there on a particular day, and the next day we were supposed to go up into Sudan. So we're in Nairobi, Kenya, gathered together in this classroom, and this fellow that had pulled us all together introduced another man who was elderly, retired. He was retired from the Navy, and I don't remember his name, but he's retired from the Navy. In fact, he had been the guy that...
Peter or something, isn't that?
No, that's the Sudanese man.
Oh, yeah.
But this was an American who had retired from the Navy, and he had been in charge of, he went before Congress, so it was some level there, but he retired. And had been in charge also in the military as captaining ships and things. So knew a lot of leadership stuff and been up there before. But he sat us down, and man, it was like a military operation at that point. He had a strategy. He had divided us into groups, and he said, we're going to go in here, and it is dangerous. And I've never been in really dangerous situations before, but there was fighting, bullets and guns. And he said, we're going to go in there, and it's dangerous, and we don't know what we're going into. So here's our best guess of how to handle it. We have 2 sat phones back then, before cell phones, satellite phones. We have 2 sat phones. We'll use them when we have to. Each group has one. We're going on 2 waves, and the first wave will call back to us and tell us what they find. If they don't call us back, then we're going to wait 24 hours and decide whether we should go in or not behind them. So it was really, all of a sudden, a very frightening ordeal. I knew it was dicey, but it was also secretive that we weren't told all the details till we got there. And then the details were pretty dicey. And I turned to one of my Kenyan friends, a really good friend of mine, Zephaniah Kiton, and I looked at him, and I said, are you sure you want to go with this? And he said, if it's the will of God, so be it. And I thought, I'm encouraged. I'll do it, okay, with that. So we got together and went in. When we got there, I won't tell the whole story, but it was pretty dicey stuff, and it was very frightening at times in the situations that we found ourselves in. And there was a lot of praying going on. But one of the things for our safety and for accomplishing the mission, but we were very remote. We had to go in and out on there was a flight that went in, 2 flights that went in, and they would not go back in. So if we missed the flight, we're stuck for a long time. and limited supplies and so forth, little tiny planes. I mean, I could reach and touch, the pilot was here, and the seat for the co-pilot, there was not a co-pilot, was here. One of our guys sat up there, and I could reach forward and touch the screen of the aircraft. So it was, oh, guy, we were flying, I'm seeing everything. They shooed the cattle and sheep off of the runway so we could land on this dirt runway. It was really pretty cool looking back on it. At the time, it was scary. But so we came in, we landed there, did our research, looked around in the area, we started meeting people, and we had groups that went around praying, just in twos, just to pray, just to walk and pray through. And then we had a little makeshift clinic. The doctor that was with us had a backpack of supplies, just that's all the medicine he had. He took a guess at what might be needed, and he took those in. And there were hundreds of people, most of them Muslim, wearing at least Muslim garb. They had come down from Darfur. We found about 300 or 400 people who were there living under tarps or pieces of plastic or just lean-tos made out of branches. And people who had just grabbed kids as they ran, and they weren't their children. And here I remember one woman came out of a thing, it was shorter than this table. She and 3 or 4 kids crawled out from under that thing when we walked by. And I couldn't understand all she was saying. But I knew some Swahili, so there was a little connection. And those kids weren't her kids. The parents had been killed. I heard her talking about they had died. And so she picked up the kids on the way fleeing. And they were living under this piece of plastic that's about twice the size, 3 times the size of this table, but only about this height. So the doctor found that, he said, most of these people that are sick here, they were in lines, nearly everybody had something. He said most of them have typhoid. He said, I don't have enough medicine for everybody. I brought some, and I've given it out. And he said, see these 2 kids here? One was about, I don't know, 4 years, I don't know how, about that big, and the other one's a little taller, little brothers. They've been brought in on a donkey or some little animal, pack animal. And he said, see these 2? He said, that one that's unconscious is probably not going to make it through the night. And he said, I'm not sure if the other one will or not either. He said, they have I don't have any medicine for them. I'm giving the medicine to their parents because they might make it, but they all have it. I have 2 doses, there's 4 people. So he said, you guys need to pray for them. So we prayed for the 2 little boys outside. 4 or 5 in our group got together. In fact, it might have been more than that by the time we finished the prayer, but we prayed, asked God to help the kids. They walked out, and as they walked out, there was a Ghanaian Christian who was there, who I knew to be a very prayerful person. And he said he wanted to start a school of prayer, in fact. So he said, we've seen God act in Ghana. He said, we've seen God raise the dead. And I remember him saying that, and I thought, well, I kind of have to see that one with my eyes, but you know, I believe he can, but I just haven't seen that. But I appreciated his faith. So he followed those 2, the parents and the 2 boys, and he told them with hand gestures, can you have the boys put them on the ground? So they took them off of the donkey, they put a little reed mat out, and they laid the 2 little boys there, both of them unconscious at this point. And one of our missionary young men from our group went over there, and they knelt, and this guy prayed. It must have been 15 or 20 minutes. But he would pray in English mostly, but he would pray songs, and he would sing prayers. It was the most interesting thing I've ever seen in my life. Powerful. But it was just all truth. But he would sing scripture, and he would pray the songs. And after about, again, 15 or 20 minutes of praying, and our prayer lasted about 3 minutes, right? All of us collectively. So we watched. Then when they finished, they loaded the boys up and took them away. The next morning we needed to go because rains were coming, there's a river, it's going to flood, and we're going to be stuck away from where the airplane's going to come the next day. So we have to go. So I'm packing things and encouraging others to pack their things. And a group of the guys jumped in one of the vehicles we had and went back to where, about 3 miles over to this refugee camp, this makeshift refugee camp. And I'm saying, don't be long. You guys, hurry back, kind of thing. And I packed and we waited, and I'm going, okay, the sky is boiling, we're going to have rain, and these guys are still not coming back. And I was a little bit miffed at the fellows for doing that. They said, we want to find out how those little boys are. And I thought, if they're fine, they're fine. If they're not, go in and find out. It's not going to fix anything, so hurry back. Finally, it must have been an hour and a half, they came back. And these guys are in the back of a Land Cruiser, or a Land Cruiser pickup, and they're just shouting and raising their hands and making noise. And so as they got closer, we found out, they said, you've got to go. He said, those boys came out to meet us.
Oh.
And what had happened is they'd gone into the village. You have to sit for a long time, and there's kind of a rigmarole you have to go through to, to take a little glass of tea and a little shot glass of tea and all this stuff, and then you can talk about what you're going to talk about. And they said, we asked where those boys were, and they pointed over to some an area where they had made some kind of little house there. And he said, we started walking up to the family, and those two boys walked out with smiles and greeted us, and they're fine. So that would be a great end to the story. But here's the greater end of the story. They said, Meeks, you've got to go back in there and take some powdered milk. We've got a pack. So here's some powdered milk that is in our case. Take it back and make sure that the boys get it. So they purchased some powdered milk or something. So, okay, but you guys get ready quick. So another guy and I go back into the drive back over there, and we have the powdered milk. We have to go through the tea and the greetings with the leaders and all this kind of stuff. And we can't even speak to one another. It's just hand gestures. And they were kind of, these are Muslim people who were kind and welcoming us and very grateful. So we kind of, after all of that, we let them know why we were there. We had this milk, it's for the two little boys. And so they're like, they understood. And they let us know that they would deliver it to the boys, because the boys were gone. I didn't see them. So they were grateful, and we finished, and we stood up, and I'm thinking, man, we've got to roll here. So, because it's about to come down. So we get in, we stand up to walk out, and as I turned, when I turned, I saw a wave of mothers bringing children for prayer. Just one after another, little kids. One little child, obviously mentally handicapped in some way. There were little babies, and the mothers in their languages were trying to tell me, can you pray for my baby? And God just moves in mysterious ways. And those are the kinds of stories of His activity that inspire us and inspire our kids when they hear them as well. So that's why we are encouraging parents to get their kids around those kinds of stories and let those be their superheroes, and let those be the mesmerizing, enchanting bedtime stories and dramas and movies and things that they expose their children to, because it would change their lives. It did mine, it has yours, and it will our children's as well. So thank you guys for taking some time.
Did you have another story?
I always have a story.
So many stories.
I have a story. You actually just reminded me of one. And you probably saw this in Africa, where people pile in the bed of a truck to go to town because there's only a few vehicles available. And this happens commonly where I'm at. But we got a call one day. One of these trucks lost their brakes in the mountains and spilled all the people out. And would we come and help? So we did. We grabbed our medical bags and we ran, just drove up as quickly as we could. Well, one of the women, there were several injuries, and some of them were bad enough we needed to take them to the hospital. But one woman in particular, who was a member of the congregation there, she broke her leg. Everyone saw it, and that was the thing. There were witnesses to this, that it was a compound fracture, and the one bone was just totally through the skin, and you could see the broken end of the bone. It was a severe break. And so we were able to splinter as best we could, get her in our vehicle along with some other patients. She had no family with her. We drove her to the hour and a half to the hospital. So I went into the emergency room with her, and we're waiting for the doctor. And this is a public hospital. And unfortunately, some of the public hospitals in Honduras are just very substandard. And I was concerned about her. She's older. She's taking care of a lot of grandchildren. And And so I leaned over and I said, you know what, let's just pray. I just want to pray over you. Is that okay? And she said, yes, so, you know. And I just started praying, and I asked God to just please heal her, that you know the state of this hospital. And all I could see was she's going to need surgery. This is a compound fracture. It's sticking out. I mean, it's bad. Well, her son then showed up right after I finished this prayer, and we left because only one person is allowed in, and we drove back to the village. About an hour later, we got a phone call from the son. We're back home. Mom's doing great. Now, Yule got the phone call, and I'm looking at his face with this phone call, trying to figure out who's he talking to, because he's looking really puzzled. And then he starts saying, no way, I saw it. The bone was sticking out of her leg. I saw it. Everyone there saw it. And he's arguing with whoever's on the phone. And he gets off the phone and he said, so that was Aurelia, the woman's name, son. And he said it was just dislocated. And I said, well, I'm pretty sure I saw the jagged bone, broken bone out of her leg. And he said, yeah, so did I. So did everyone else. But the son wasn't there. So he, and so he calls the village president, who had come to the emergencies, to that scene. And he said, tell me what you saw. Did you see the bone coming out of her leg? He goes, oh, yeah. He goes, well, they're saying it was just dislocated. He goes, no, no, no. This was not a joint. This was a ragged bone, a jagged bone sticking out of her leg that wasn't attached to anything. So anyways, we went to go see her. We just drove over there, and she was walking on it and just had some stitches where the bone had come out of the leg. There were stitches. And I said, so how are you feeling? She goes, God healed me. He answered your prayer. And okay, so that's one of those times you go, I think I'm learning more about God here than that person did. She just accepted it at face value. God did this, and I was just amazed and in love with God at that moment, that he was so faithful to that prayer, even though I had this doubt in me, you know.
Little faith, but you
little
still prayed
faith.
it.
Yeah, and it's one of those times you know, forgive me for my lack of faith. Enough faith to pray, but not enough faith to believe he could answer it in such a miraculous way. And so, yeah, we saw things happen that were just incredible.
Yeah.
Well, we could hear all the stories.
Oh,
So many.
There are so many. I probably need to wrap up the one that I started a while ago, just the Sudan story, is that the day we left, after the boys were up and running and doing well, we made it back after 6 or 7 hours to the original place where we were encamped, and then we're getting our flight out the next morning. And that night we all put together a document, each giving reports on what we found, whether it was education or nutrition or whatever the needs were, and all that. It was a pretty lengthy document with pictures and everything. Had it together in one on a thumb drive, because we had a few computers. We put that together. After dark that, I don't know what it was, 8 or 9 o'clock that night, about the time we're going to shut down, some men had evidently arrived earlier in the day who were, I think, German, and they were the German organization, and they were coming to survey the area to find the needs of the area. And they only had a couple of days. Well, 20 of us in 2 or 3 days' time had done a lot of research, and we had it right there. So we went over, we found out what was going on. What they were looking for was everything we had. So we handed it to them, and within 2 weeks there was food, medicine. These people were on the map, and I think NORAD and some other organizations started coming in and bringing them aid, and within 2 weeks' time they were on the map. So it was orchestrated to the day.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty exciting stuff.
That is.
So,
that doesn't happen by accident.
It doesn't. Anyway, thank you guys again, and
you
appreciate those
guys.
stories. Appreciate what you've done. Okay,
Thank
so
God.
there are some resources in the library at the missions at the Ministry Center. There are some books to read there for children, and there are other resources there as well. So let's make sure our kids get exposed to these kinds of stories in their lives, as well as the fairy tales and the fun stuff and all that we have available to us, let's make sure that we have this available. And not only in foreign settings, but also those people around us who are just in our neighborhood, who are doing good, who are involved in serving and ministering and believing and trusting elders in the church and other families around. So make sure that you're exchanging stories with one another, how God has answered your prayers or worked in your life, and how you're expressing faith. So may God bless us and bless our children.